You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's almost like engineering. Like you
Yeah.
fall off your bike, you break your arm, and you go to the hospital, and the doctor pulls up the x-ray, points to that jagged, glowing white line on the screen, and just says, there it is, there's the problem.
Right. It's a completely binary system. I mean, the bone is broken or it isn't.
Yeah.
And as a patient, there is a profound psychological comfort in that visibility, I think. We are visual creatures, so we like our suffering to be neatly categorized, localized, and most importantly, visible to the people treating us.
Exactly. But then, you step into the world of clinical psychology,
Yeah.
and you're dealing with human behavior, with severe anxiety or depression or compulsive thoughts, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Completely useless.
You can't put a fractured sense of self-worth on a light box.
Right.
You really can't.
Oh.
So we're looking at this diagnostic landscape that for a very long time was completely murky, just total guesswork in some ways.
It was. It really was.
But today, our mission for this deep dive is to map out how that changed. We're going to track the evolution of human healing, looking at how psychology transformed from this somewhat mystical practice of interpreting the ghosts of our past into what is now a highly precise scientific architecture of behavioral change.
And it is arguably one of the most fascinating trajectories in modern science. I mean, for over a century, this field wrestled with fiercely competing systems of healing.
Yeah.
Entire schools of thought were built, championed, and then fundamentally deconstructed, all trying to answer just one question.
Which is?
What is the most effective mechanism to alleviate psychological suffering? So we're going to walk through the major eras of that evolution and look at how each failure or limitation birthed the next massive breakthrough.
Right. And to do that, we have an incredible stack of sources today. We're pulling heavily from the NOBA Discovering Psychology 2.0 textbook. Specifically, there's this brilliant chapter called Therapeutic Orientations, and that's by Boettcher, Hofmann, and Wu.
It's a great chapter.
It really is. And because we really want to understand how this feels on the ground, in practice, we also have an incredibly detailed set of lecture slides from a Dr. Riordon's Intro to Psychology class.
Yeah, and the combination of these two sources provides a perfect lens. Because, well, the textbook gives us the high-level peer-reviewed theory and the historical shifts.
Right, the bird's eye view.
Exactly. But Dr. Riordon's slides anchor that theory. They show us the practical, messy application. They break down what these therapies actually sound like when you were sitting on the couch in the room with a clinician.
Which brings us to why this matters to you, the person listening right now.
Yeah.
Look, our sources point out a massive demographic shift in who is actually studying this material today.
Oh, absolutely. The demographics have completely changed.
Right? Like maybe you are a non-traditional student. You're juggling a full-time career, a family, and academic workloads late at night. Or maybe you are just someone trying to understand your own mental software.
Right.
Either way, demystifying these systems is crucial because it transforms us from passive patients into informed consumers of mental health. It gives you the vocabulary to understand what is happening in your own brain, which is the first step in breaking down the systemic stigma that still heavily surrounds mental health care.
It's so true. Because when you look at the broader picture, we're living through a very unique era of psychological distress. The sheer volume of information we process daily takes a massive toll.
Oh yeah, the burnout is real.
Right, so understanding these mechanisms isn't just for clinicians anymore. It is a necessary life skill.
Right.
When you understand how a specific therapeutic modality works, like what it targets and what its blind spots are, you can make highly informed decisions regarding your own care.
Or the care of your family.
Exactly. You stop seeing therapy as a black box and you start seeing it as a specific set of tools.
Okay, well, let's open up that toolbox. To understand where we are going, we have to understand where we started. And when we talk about the first organized clinical attempt to alleviate psychiatric suffering, all roads lead back to Sigmund Freud.
They really do.
The birth of psychoanalysis.
Yeah, you truly cannot discuss the foundation of psychotherapy without starting in Vienna with Freud. He established what our textbook aptly calls the unconscious battlegrounds.
Unconscious battlegrounds. I love that phrasing.
It's very evocative. And this entire model rests on a foundational assumption that was quite radical at the time.
Mm.
The idea that our present interpersonal vulnerabilities, our neuroses and our anxieties, they are not random.
Right.
They are deeply mechanistically shaped by early childhood experiences that we have entirely pushed out of our conscious awareness.
Right. I was looking at Dr. Riordon's slides where they break down Freud's structural model of the mind. You have the EI, the ego, and the superego.
The classic trio.
Yes, the classic trio. And as I was reading the definitions, I couldn't help but picture this as a really tense, incredibly dysfunctional family road trip.
Oh, that's interesting. I can see the architecture of that. Break down the passengers for me.
Okay, so strapped into the back seat, you have the Ide. The slides define the Ide as entirely pleasure-driven and purely unconscious.
Right.
So that is absolutely the toddler in the back seat screaming for ice cream.
100%.
Right. The Ide doesn't care about the rules of the road. It doesn't care that you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no ice cream stand for 50 miles. It operates purely on dopamine and immediate gratification. It wants what it wants, and it wants it right now.
And that aligns perfectly with Freud's pleasure principle.
Yep.
The it is entirely detached from reality or physical consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, it is pure, unfiltered biological drive.
Exactly. So then right next to the driver in the passenger seat, you have the superego.
Right.
This is semi-conscious and hyper-focused on morals, rules, and judgment. That is the strict, rigid grandparent.
Oh, the grandparent, yes.
Right. They are constantly judging the toddler's sugar intake, pointing out that the speed limit is exactly 65 miles per hour, and just generally reciting societal expectations at you.
Yeah, the superego is essentially the internalized voice of societal standards and parental rules. It operates on guilt and the pursuit of an often unattainable perfection.
It sounds exhausting.
It is.
And then, stuck in the driver's seat, you have the ego, the semi-conscious mediator. That is the utterly exhausted parent just trying to steer the car.
Just trying to keep it on the road.
Exactly. They are trying to keep the toddler from having a full-blown meltdown by offering a cracker while simultaneously trying to appease the judging grandparent, all while trying not to crash the car into a ditch.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize the structural model. The ego's job is essentially reality testing.
Right.
And in traditional psychoanalysis, the working theory is that psychological distress occurs when the ego starts failing at that mediation.
So the car starts swerving.
Exactly. If the toddler is screaming too loud or the grandparent is too tyrannical, the driver swerves. So the goal of psychoanalysis is to essentially pull over the car, open the doors, and uncover these deeply buried, unconscious conflicts between the passengers.
But the problem is the passengers don't want to talk. They're defended.
They are highly defended.
So Freud had to develop techniques to bypass the conscious mind. Things like free association, where patients are instructed to just speak constantly without filtering, hoping the unconscious slips out.
Right.
And of course, dream analysis, looking for symbolic representations of the Ide's desires.
Because the assumption is that your conscious mind is heavily guarded. Your ego has built up defense mechanisms to protect you from the terrifying reality of what your id actually wants, or the crushing guilt of what your superego demands.
So the therapist has to act as a detective, kind of looking for clues in the margins of your consciousness.
Exactly.
And this leads to what I think is the most fascinating part of this early era. One of the major techniques highlighted in Dr. Riordon's slides is the concept of transference. Oh, transference is huge.
It is. I was reading through the slides on this, and it hit me like a ton of bricks because I realized I do this constantly in my professional life.
Wait, really?
Right.
How so? Give me an example of how you recognized it.
So my dad was a great guy, but he was incredibly strict and highly critical when it came to academics or performance. There was just no room for error.
Okay.
So I was reading the slides, and I realized that whenever my current editor at work sends me an email with even mild constructive feedback, like, hey, can we tweak this one paragraph?
Oh, no.
Yeah, my body has a visceral panic response. I completely freeze. I get defensive. I am unconsciously projecting the terrifying critical aura of my father onto an editor who is actually very supportive.
Wow.
Yeah, I cast her in the role of my dad without her ever auditioning for it.
You are touching on the exact mechanism of transference right there.
Really?
Yeah, you are taking a historical emotional template and overlaying it onto a present-day relationship. The slides actually categorize this brilliantly. What you just described is essentially the first type of transference. Seeing the other person in the exact same way you believed your parent to have been.
Exactly. Your unconscious mind sees a figure of authority holding red ink, and it immediately boots up the father software.
It's wild to think about it as software.
Mm.
But the slides go deeper. There's a second type that is almost the inverse. Seeing the other person as being like what you wish your parent could have been like.
Right, the idealization transference. And this one is incredibly common and honestly often devastating in romantic relationships.
Oh, how so?
Well, if someone grew up with a highly neglectful or emotionally unavailable parent, they might transfer the massive unfulfilled expectation of absolute unconditional presence onto a new partner.
Oh, wow. So the partner can't just be a normal human who occasionally needs alone time.
Exactly. If the partner asks for space, the person experiences a disproportionate, catastrophic sense of abandonment.
Because they're reacting to the past.
Yes, they aren't reacting to the partner asking for an hour to read a book. They are reacting to 20 years of childhood neglect that they have unconsciously tasked this new partner with fixing. They place the impossible burden of their unfulfilled childhood wish onto someone they just met.
That explains so many bad breakups I've witnessed, honestly.
Right.
But the third type listed in the slides is the one that really twisted my brain. It says, acting yourself as you were as a child and acting like your parent did, which means you are forcing a repetition of the trauma.
Yes. This is a cornerstone of psychodynamic theory. It's called the repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Yeah. The human brain is paradoxically drawn to the familiar, even if the familiar is incredibly painful. If you grew up in a chaotic household where love was expressed through screaming matches, peaceful communication feels deeply unnatural and even threatening to your nervous system.
So you actively sabotage the peace.
Yes, you do. You might regress to a rebellious, childish role and actively provoke your partner until they finally lose their temper and yell at you.
Oh my God.
And in that moment, your conscious mind is upset, but your unconscious mind is saying, this is the dynamic I know. I understand the rules of this game.
Because you unconsciously manipulated a healthy partner into playing the role of your dysfunctional parent.
Exactly.
That is terrifyingly brilliant. And in the traditional Freudian setup, the therapist deliberately becomes a blank slate. So the patient projects all this stuff onto them, right?
Right.
The therapist uses the transference, like how the patient interacts with them in the room, as a live-action map of their unconscious conflicts.
That is the core of the work. The therapist doesn't offer advice. They offer interpretation of the transference.
Okay. I admit, this sounds incredible from a philosophical standpoint. It makes for great literature,
It really does.
But I have to push back here on the practical application.
Go for it.
Isn't this just incredibly expensive intellectual navel-gazing? Like, if I am a non-traditional student having debilitating panic attacks before every exam, or I can't get on a subway without feeling like I'm going to die, spending 3 years talking about the nuances of my relationship with my father seems wildly inefficient. How do we know this actually fixes the immediate panic?
Well, your skepticism is perfectly aligned with the historical shift in the field. The source material validates that pushback completely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you look under the limitations section of Dr. Riordon's slides, which is heavily reinforced by the NOBA textbook, modern empirical research shows a severe lack of rigorous support for traditional psychoanalysis as a frontline treatment.
The slides explicitly list it as ineffective for severe psychopathology, don't they?
Yes, they do, because it demands a highly specific set of patient traits. It requires a high level of verbal ability, a massive capacity for abstract thinking, and an immense amount of time and money.
Right.
We're talking about multiple sessions a week for years. If you're experiencing acute, debilitating symptoms that threaten your livelihood or your physical safety, you do not have 3 years to excavate the basement of your unconscious.
You need a life raft now.
Exactly. The traditional Freudian approach with the therapist as this all-knowing interpretive authority simply does not hold up to modern empirical scrutiny when it comes to rapid symptom reduction.
So if digging through the past with an archaeological brush is too slow and lacks empirical backing for acute crises, the field clearly had to pivot.
It did. A massive pivot.
Therapists realized they needed a completely different vehicle. They stopped acting like mechanics trying to tear apart the engine to find a broken belt from 30 years ago. And instead, they handed the keys over to the patient.
Which ushers in a radical paradigm shift in the mid-20th century. We move away from the deterministic gloom of psychoanalysis, this idea that you are forever a prisoner of your childhood conflicts, and we step into the humanistic movement.
Spearheaded by figures like Carl Rogers.
Yes, Carl Rogers.
Person-centered therapy. I read the section on Rogers, and I absolutely love this quote of his in the text. It says, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change."
It's a beautiful quote.
It really is.
Yeah.
That is a total 180-degree turn from Freud's let's dig up all your buried, shameful trauma and dissect it under a microscope approach.
It's a complete inversion of the power dynamic. Rogers argued that humans have an inherent biological drive towards self-actualization and growth,
Okay.
much like a plant naturally grows toward the sun. The only reason a person becomes psychologically stagnant or distressed is because their environment has blocked their access to the sun.
So the therapist's job is no longer to be the expert on your life who diagnoses your hidden flaws.
Exactly. The patient is the only true expert on their own internal experience.
The textbook uses a fascinating term here, unspecific treatment factors. Rogers built this entirely new therapeutic relationship based on egalitarianism, utilizing warmth, empathy, and this beautiful core concept of unconditional positive regard.
Unconditional positive regard is the engine of humanistic therapy. It means the therapist accepts and supports the client, absolutely,
Well, no matter what.
without any judgment or conditions, regardless of what the client says or does in the session. It creates an environment so fundamentally safe that the client's rigid defense mechanisms finally drop.
So to refine my earlier analogy, if Freud is the mechanic pulling the car apart, Rogers is a supportive driving instructor.
I like where this is going.
But he's an instructor who never touches the steering wheel. He just sits in the passenger seat, radiating warmth, and tells you that you are fundamentally a good, capable driver until you find the internal confidence to steer yourself out of the ditch.
That captures the dynamic beautifully. The therapist is a facilitator, not a director. They use techniques like active listening and reflective speech.
What does that look like?
It's basically mirroring the client's emotions back to them, so the client can hear their own inner voice more clearly. Like, it sounds like you felt really betrayed when that happened.
Ah, okay. But looking critically at the sources, there's a significant catch here, too.
There is.
Yeah.
The text explicitly notes that while this approach is highly acceptable to patients, because it feels incredibly validating and comforting to be heard without judgment,
Sure.
its empirical outcomes for treating specific disorders remain decidedly mixed.
And practically speaking, that makes sense, right? Like if someone is dealing with something acute, say severe obsessive-compulsive disorder or a crippling phobia of elevators, is a warm passenger seat really enough?
That's a great question.
Just sitting next to someone and saying, I believe in your inherent ability to heal, doesn't teach a phobic brain how to actually diffuse a physiological panic attack. It feels good, but it doesn't seem like it equips you with mechanics.
You've isolated the exact limitation that drove the next evolution. Warmth, empathy, and unconditional positive regard are now considered essential baseline requirements for any good therapeutic alliance.
You need that foundation.
You absolutely need it. But for severe specific distress, a good relationship isn't a cure. The field realized that feeling heard is wonderful, but it doesn't systematically alter maladaptive brain chemistry or extinguish conditioned fear responses.
They needed more tools.
Exactly. The scientific community demanded structured, active, and highly measurable strategies.
Which ushers in the undisputed heavyweight champion of modern psychology,
Here we go.
the Cognitive Behavioral Revolution, or CBT.
Developed independently by Aaron T. Beck and Albert Ellis, CBT is described unequivocally in our textbook as the contemporary gold standard of psychiatric intervention.
The gold standard.
Yes, it is highly structured, deeply pragmatic, and entirely focused on the present moment.
And unlike the therapies that came before it, CBT brought the receipts. It has a massive, overwhelming volume of empirical data backing it up.
Mountains of data.
Right. The text references seminal meta-analyses by researchers like Hofmann and Boettcher, proving that structured CBT interventions don't just make people feel better, they can literally alter human brain circuitry.
What is truly fascinating about CBT is the underlying mechanism of action. It operates on a very specific triad, which Dr. Riordon's slides visually break down for the students: thoughts, emotion, and behavior.
Thoughts, emotion, behavior.
Yes, these three elements form an interconnected triangle, constantly feeding into one another.
And the foundational rule of that triangle is counterintuitive to how most of us live our lives.
Oh, so?
Well, we usually think that an event causes our emotion. Like, someone cuts me off in traffic, so I get angry. The event caused the anger. But the textbook drops a quote from the ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus that perfectly sums up the CBT counterargument.
Oh, I know the one.
Men are not moved by things, but by the view they take of them.
That is the crux of cognitive theory right there. The event itself is neutral. It is your cognitive appraisal, the rapid, often subconscious interpretation of the event that triggers the amygdala and creates the emotional response.
Wow.
And CBT operates on the goal of systematically identifying and modifying those cognitive appraisals.
The text introduces the concept of schemas here. These are the internal algorithms we use to process reality. Dr. Riordon's slides categorize these into core beliefs about the self, the world, and the future.
Right.
Let's ground this in a real-world application from the sources, because this is where it gets highly relevant for the listeners. The text mentions a massive 2024 longitudinal study by Curran, Hill, and Pose titled "Perfectionism is Accelerating Over Time."
A vital study,
Yeah.
truly. They analyzed 35 years of data and found that modern populations, particularly students, are increasingly suffering from severe anxiety and depression due to this deeply internalized schema that their environment demands flawless, unrealistic perfection just to survive.
It's a survival mechanism gone wrong. So if a student has that maladaptive schema running in the background, we see what the vocabulary list calls an automatic thought.
An automatic thought, yes.
A spontaneous, lightning-fast thought that sustains a negative bias. For example, a student gets a B- on a midterm. The automatic thought isn't a rational, oh, I should probably study the third chapter more.
Right.
The automatic thought is catastrophic. It's, I am a total failure, my professors think I'm a joke, I am going to lose my scholarship, and I'll be unemployable. In a fraction of a second, that one grade destroys their schema of the self, the world, and the future.
And the ensuing emotion is debilitating panic. And the resulting behavior is often avoidance. They stop going to class because the environment is too painful.
So how does CBT intervene? Because unlike humanistic therapy, a CBT therapist doesn't just offer warmth.
Right.
And unlike psychoanalysis, they don't ask about the student's childhood. They actively, scientifically challenge the structural integrity of that catastrophic thought.
They do. And we have a perfect example of how to do this in Dr. Riordon's slides. It's an activity called the way we think.
Boom.
Instead of just reading a list of steps, let's actually apply this.
Oh, let's do it. Role play time.
Say, I am dealing with massive anxiety about presenting this very deep dive to our producers. My automatic thought is, I'm going to stutter, they will hate it, and I'll be fired.
Okay, let's walk through the cognitive restructuring process just as a therapist would. The first mechanism is to define the fear explicitly. If this worry of yours was indeed true, that they hate the presentation, what does it actually mean to you and why does it bother you so much?
Well, if I dig into it, it means my peers won't respect my intellect. And it bothers me because I derive my self-worth from my professional competence.
Notice how we've already moved from the event, the presentation, to the core schema. My self-worth requires absolute competence.
I see what you did there.
So the next step is reality testing. What is the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen?
The worst thing. I get fired, I lose my income, and I have to move into my sister's basement.
Okay, now we introduce the logical wedge. When you look at the empirical evidence of your entire career, do you really think it is highly probable that one stuttered presentation will result in immediate termination?
Well, no.
And even if it did, do you possess the skills to cope with it?
When you force me to look at the data, no. I have a 10-year track record. One bad meeting won't erase that. And even if I did lose my job, I have an emergency fund and a good resume. I wouldn't die. It wouldn't be the end of the world.
See?
But this brings us to a step in the slides that I find incredibly profound. The therapist asks, what do you secretly get out of thinking this way? What is the hidden advantage?
Ooh. You're hitting on a core advanced insight in CBT. Maladaptive thoughts often survive because they serve a hidden utility. What is the utility of your panic?
If I convince myself that I will be fired for any mistake, I generate a massive amount of adrenaline.
Right.
I use that terror to force myself to over-prepare and work 14-hour days. The anxiety is a deeply toxic but highly effective productivity tool.
Identifying that utility is the breakthrough. You realize you are using fear as fuel. Once you see the mechanism, you can consciously choose to find a healthier fuel source.
You restructure the thought.
Exactly. You shift the internal language from, I am a failure if I stumble, to I accept myself even if I occasionally struggle with public speaking.
That language shift is so subtle, but biologically it lowers the cortisol response.
It does.
But CBT doesn't just stop at cognitive restructuring. The behavioral part of the triad brings in exposure therapy. And this is where things get intensely practical.
Oh, yeah.
The slides feature this very striking image of a red elevator to illustrate this.
Right. If you have a severe elevator phobia, a CBT therapist is not going to spend weeks just talking to you about the concept of elevators.
No, they are not.
They are going to physically walk you into the lobby of a building and put you in an elevator.
Because you have to change the behavior to change the brain. The text explains the neurological goal here is extinction learning.
Extinction learning. Walk me through that.
Correct. So when you avoid the elevator, your brain rewards you with a drop in anxiety. This accidentally reinforces the false belief that elevators are deadly.
Ah, you're feeding the fear.
Exactly. Exposure therapy forces the patient to directly face the feared stimuli without avoidance. You stand in the elevator as your anxiety peaks. You stay there until your brain's alarm system runs out of fuel and you realize the catastrophic outcome, the elevator plummeting, isn't happening.
So the neural pathway linking elevator to death weakens, and the fear response eventually extinguishes.
It's incredibly effective, it's heavily proven, and it is remarkably brief compared to psychoanalysis.
But the slides do list one major disadvantage:
What's that?
the sheer amount of patient effort required. CBT is exhausting.
It is very exhausting.
You have to constantly monitor your thoughts, complete behavioral homework, and aggressively wrestle with your own mind every single day.
It is a highly combative approach to one's own cognition. You're constantly interrogating yourself. Which naturally brings us to the next evolution in the field.
Oh, because researchers and clinicians started asking, what if, instead of constantly wrestling with your thoughts, you simply stopped fighting them altogether?
Exactly. Which introduces the acceptance and mindfulness waves. This is where we see ancient Eastern philosophical practices getting heavily integrated into modern clinical science.
The textbook details how ancient Buddhist mindfulness practices were essentially stripped of their religious context and scientificized for the clinic.
Right, and we see the emergence of a whole new alphabet soup of treatments. MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction; MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy; DBT, dialectical behavior therapy; and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
The fundamental shift in mechanics here is wild to me. In CBT, if you have the thought, I am going to fail this exam, you fight it. You challenge the evidence, you restructure it.
You interrogate it.
Right. But in mindfulness-based therapies, the goal is non-judgmental observation. The mechanism is cognitive diffusion.
Cognitive diffusion.
Yeah, you just notice the thought. You say to yourself, I am having the thought that I will fail. You don't argue with it. You just let it pass like a leaf floating down a river.
The focus shifts entirely away from altering the content of the thought and moves towards self-regulation of attention.
Okay.
You are orienting toward the present moment. By observing the thought without attaching your identity to it, you prevent yourself from becoming entangled in a downward spiral of rumination.
But I have to play devil's advocate for the listener here.
Does he do?
If I just accept my paralyzing anxiety about failing the exam, aren't I just giving up? Like, how does accepting something terrible lead to any sort of positive behavioral change? It sounds like passivity.
That is the core paradox of this approach, and it brings us to a vital vocabulary term from the text: the dialectical worldview.
Which is the entire foundation of DBT created by Marsha Linehan.
Exactly. A dialectical worldview is a philosophical perspective that balances two seemingly opposite truths simultaneously. In therapy, it is the delicate, incredibly powerful balance of radical acceptance and aggressive change.
How does that work in practice? It sounds contradictory.
Well, let's use your exam anxiety. When you fight the anxiety, you create a secondary layer of suffering. You are anxious about the exam, and now you are angry and anxious about being anxious.
Oh, totally.
You've doubled your cognitive load. Radical acceptance means looking at the reality and saying, I'm experiencing severe anxiety right now. It is incredibly uncomfortable, but it's just a physiological sensation. I accept that it is here. You don't judge yourself for it.
By dropping the judgment, you drop that secondary layer of suffering.
Precisely. You lower your overall baseline of distress. And from that slightly calmer baseline, you now have the cognitive bandwidth to utilize coping skills and actually study for the exam.
Wow.
Acceptance isn't resignation. Acceptance is simply acknowledging the exact starting line of reality, which is the absolute prerequisite for any meaningful change.
That makes so much sense. So we now have these incredible, empirically proven frameworks, from the deep historical excavations of Freud to the warm, supportive environment of Rogers to the rigorous thought restructuring of Beck's CBT, and finally to the present moment awareness and dialectical balance of mindfulness.
It's quite the toolkit.
We have the architecture of human healing, but the sources highlight a massive modern crisis.
Accessibility.
Exactly, accessibility. How do we get these life-saving treatments out of the traditional, highly expensive therapist's office where there's a 6-month wait list anyway, and into the hands of marginalized populations, rural communities, or a busy non-traditional student juggling 3 jobs?
And that leads us to the bleeding edge of the field. We are looking at emerging treatments that are actively digitizing and, in some cases, biologicalizing these therapeutic orientations.
The textbook references a landmark 2022 APA report titled Psychology as a Core Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Discipline. Psychology is now officially classified as a STEM field.
Yes.
And a huge driver of that is digital delivery. The smartphone in your pocket has completely shattered the physical boundaries of the traditional clinic.
We are talking about highly sophisticated internet and mobile-delivered therapies. We now have real-time symptom tracking using EMA, Ecological Momentary Assessment.
How does that work?
Well, the app prompts you throughout the day to log your mood, gathering infinitely more accurate data than relying on a patient's faulty memory during a session a week later.
Oh, that's brilliant. The text points out how revolutionary this is for breaking down barriers. You don't need to find a babysitter, take time off work, and drive an hour to a clinic. A student can use an app-based CBT tool to cognitively restructure a panic attack in the library bathroom 10 minutes before a final exam. It weaves mental health maintenance seamlessly into the fabric of a busy lifestyle.
But the technology goes far beyond just providing convenient access to traditional tools. The text introduces a fascinating mechanism called cognitive bias modification.
This concept completely blew my mind. These are specialized computer applications and video games designed to automatically reprogram problematic subconscious thinking patterns.
Video games.
Yeah, video games. The text uses the example of training a user to ignore harmful environmental stimuli, like alcohol cues for someone struggling with addiction or social threats for someone with severe social anxiety.
What is crucial to understand here is the underlying neurological mechanism. Traditional CBT requires massive conscious effort. Gamification bypasses conscious resistance entirely.
I thought of it like sneaking pureed vegetables into a kid's fruit smoothie. The kid thinks they're just drinking a sweet treat, but you actually delivering essential nutrients.
Yeah, it's a very apt analogy. Let's look at how it works mechanically for social anxiety.
Huh.
A person with severe social anxiety has a subconscious visual bias.
Okay.
If they walk into a room of 50 people, and 49 are smiling but one is frowning, their amygdala instantly locks onto the frowning face. They process it as a lethal threat.
So how does a video game fix that?
The cognitive bias modification program flashes grids of faces on a screen for fractions of a second. The user is tasked with tapping the smiling faces to score points.
That's it.
That's it. They have to do it rapidly, over and over again.
Okay.
By forcing the user to constantly seek out and tap the positive social cues while ignoring the negative ones, the program is literally retraining the brain's visual attention bias at a subconscious synaptic level.
Right.
You are rewiring the hardware while the conscious mind is just distracted by playing a game.
That is staggering. We are altering the subconscious without ever needing to talk about childhood trauma.
Right.
And in tandem with these technological breakthroughs, the text reveals what I can only call a biological wildcard. Researchers are developing pharmaceutical agents specifically designed to enhance these behavioral interventions.
This is wild.
And this is the part of the textbook that made me do a double take. Using antibiotics during exposure therapy sessions. How on earth does an antibiotic cure a phobia? Like for a sinus infection?
I know, it sounds entirely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
We think of antibiotics as fighting bacterial infections. But neuropharmacology is much more nuanced. Researchers discovered that certain antibiotics, specifically a drug called D-cycloserine, have a fascinating side effect.
Okay, what does it do?
They target and stimulate NMDA receptors in the brain.
And what do those receptors do?
NMDA receptors are heavily involved in learning and neuroplasticity, particularly in the amygdala, where fear memories are stored. So imagine a patient doing exposure therapy for that severe elevator phobia we discussed.
Right. They're standing in the elevator waiting for the panic to subside.
Right. They are trying to achieve extinction learning, forming a new memory that says elevators are safe to overwrite the old memory that says elevators equal death.
Okay.
If the patient takes this specific antibiotic just before the exposure section, the drug supercharges those NMDA receptors.
Yeah.
It biochemically greases the wheels of neuroplasticity.
Oh, wow.
It accelerates the brain's ability to consolidate the new, safe memory, maximizing the speed and the longevity of the recovery.
So it's literally hacking the biology to make the psychology stick faster.
Yes.
It is incredible science. But I have to push back on this whole technological utopia for a second.
Uh-oh. Here it comes.
Well, If an app is tracking my mood data, and a gamified algorithm is retraining my subconscious visual bias, and an antibiotic is chemically cementing my learning, where is the humanity?
That's the big question.
Right. One of Dr. Riordon's slides asked the students to consider their personal boundaries with this technology. Are we risking deep human isolation for the sake of clinical efficiency? Is the foundational warmth and empathy of Carl Rogers totally dead in this new STEM-driven era?
It is the most vital, ethical, and practical question the field faces right now. But if we synthesize the data from the sources, the answer is no. Humanity is not dead.
It's not.
No. The text heavily emphasizes that these digital and biological tools are designed to enhance behavioral interventions, not to entirely replace the human connection.
Okay, that's a relief.
Right. The primary driving goal of these innovations is democratizing access, ensuring that a single mother working double shifts or someone living in a rural area hundreds of miles from a specialist can finally receive evidence-based interventions. The technology is a bridge, not an island.
I like that. There's a quote in the text from the pioneering psychologist Kurt Lehmann that I think perfectly captures this entire evolution we've discussed today. He said, if you want to truly understand something, try to change it.
It perfectly encapsulates the scientific journey. You don't understand the mechanism of the mind until you attempt to alleviate its suffering.
Exactly. So let's recap this massive journey we just took. We started in the murky depths with Freud's unconscious excavations, trying to bring the buried past to light.
Right.
When that proved too slow and untestable, we moved to Carl Rogers' warm passenger seat, realizing the immense power of a safe, non-directive environment.
Then the cognitive revolution of Beck and Ellis gave us the rigorous, empirical restructuring of our automatic thoughts and schemas.
From there, we integrated ancient Eastern practices to embrace mindfulness, cognitive diffusion, and the dialectical balance of radical acceptance and aggressive change.
And finally, we looked at how smartphones, subconscious video games, and targeted biological hacks are democratizing these very tools.
The key takeaway for the listener is agency. By understanding these distinct modalities, you are no longer a passive observer of your own distress, waiting for a doctor to point at an X-ray.
You are armed with the knowledge of how these systems work. You can recognize your own cognitive distortions, understand the utility of your anxiety, and be an active architect of your own behavioral change.
And that leads us to our final, somewhat provocative thought to leave you with today. We've seen how rapidly this field has evolved from the Victorian couch to the smartphone.
Very rapidly.
So, if specialized video games can bypass our conscious resistance to alter bad habits, and sophisticated apps can track our emotional fluctuations with more accuracy than our own memories,
Where are you going with this?
will the therapist of the late 21st century even be a human being? Or will they simply be a highly individualized, constantly learning, AI-driven digital environment that lives right in our pockets?
Oh, that is a chilling thought, but a very real possibility.
Something to mull over as you go about your day. Until next time.